Who's answering? Donna?
What?
Are we answering a lot if we answer for an invocation?
Yeah.
I'll leave it at that. So good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 6th quarterly forum, community report forum, and this is kind of the forum where we actually present what's happened in the past few months with the monitoring team, talk about what the progress is, and give the community an opportunity to voice their concerns, their ideas, and just get a real-time perspective of what's going on. So I'm Ray Kelly, I'm the lead community liaison. Ken Thompson, Seth Rosenthal, and Chuck Ramsey are the leads on our monitoring team. I'm going to hand it off to them, but just notice, a lot of you know me, I walk around a lot. It's just because I can't see great and I don't want anybody to feel like I'm staring at them. So I maneuver a whole lot in the room, but I'm going to hand it off to Ken. Our format is going to be the same as it always is. We try to listen as much as we talk. So Ken, I think we have 5 specific areas we're going to cover tonight.
5 or 6 with them.
5 or 6. And as the team addresses one particular area of concern tonight, we're going to kind of pause and make sure if you have questions, we answer them while it's hot on your brain and see if we can resolve some of these issues tonight. So I'm going to hand it to Ken.
Thank you, Ray, and welcome, first of all. And I want to thank all of you for showing up. I'm certain you could be doing some other things in this balmy, Baltimore, steamy evening. And I'm glad that you took some time to show up to see us because, as I have said on a number of occasions, those of us who are involved in the consent decree, this is a passion for us. It's our mission to try to get this police department to conform itself so that it becomes a constitutional police department. And for us to succeed in our effort to help the department, we need the community to help the department. And so when I see a good group like this show up, I mean, I'm very happy. And so I want to thank you again for taking time out of your day to see and listen to us this evening. I've seen some of you before, and I'm not going to go through the long, arduous discussion of the consent decree because I think most of you know how it came to be. But just for historical perspective, when the monitoring team was selected and began its work in earnest, which was essentially early 2018, our review led us to conclude that the department was seriously dysfunctional, that it essentially needed to be rebuilt up from the ground up because it was in such bad shape. And for it to accomplish the goals and the mandates set out in the consent decree, the only way for this to be successful from our perspective was to essentially address some foundational issues. And so we essentially spent the first year with the Department of Justice's help, helping the department revise its policies. Now people say, well, what's the big deal with policies? Well, for a police department, it's really the foundational stuff because that's where you build out training, that's where you build out protocol, that's where you build out just about everything that goes on in a department. So I'm happy to be able to tell you tonight that I think, and while there's still a lot of work to be done in that area, the policies that have been revised, I think by most accounts, are now state-of-the-art best practices. And so the foundation is there. So what are we doing now? This second year of the monitoring plan is when we begin really the tough work. This is the implementation stage. And the first thing we have to address is training. And Seth will talk a little bit about that sometime this evening. But that is critical. It's a beginning step, but it's critical to the overall success of the department. Now, for the past quarter, we have addressed 3 things in monthly meetings. And when we come to the community meetings, we try to tell you what goes on in the monthly meetings with the judge. So this quarter, we've addressed interaction with youth by the police department. We've dealt with staffing, and we've dealt with supervision. But there are 2 other issues in addition to training that we hope to talk about a little bit tonight. One has to do with leadership. And I'm just going to say briefly that I think we were very fortunate leadership is an important factor because that's, somebody's got to steer the ship. But the other important and critical unit is internal affairs. And you say, well, you know, why is that? Well, in my judgment, and I think it's shared by most of the folks on the monitoring team, until we can get that department or that unit in a place where the community begins to at least develop some sense of trust that police officers who commit misconduct are being treated appropriately and are being disciplined appropriately, it's going to be difficult to build that trust. Of course, the main mission of the consent decree is to develop trust between the community and the department. So we pretty much spend on a daily basis looking at something in that particular unit. So that leads me to discuss a little bit of detail one of the more recent events that I think you would like to know about that affects internal affairs. First of all, they changed the name of the unit now. I think it's the Public Integrity Bureau, and that was a name that new Commissioner Harrison wanted to add to it. Most of you remember about a month ago, I guess it was a month ago, a circuit court judge in Maryland dismissed 12 misconduct cases. And some of those cases were quite serious. And when those cases were dismissed, you know what that means. That means officers who should have been disciplined got a free pass. Well, that is unacceptable. The police department has to get its act together because if you're not going to process these cases appropriately, if you're not going to investigate them appropriately, again, the community is never going to trust the department. Now, what happened? Well, there are probably a whole lot of reasons why those cases were not investigated within the time frame that the statute requires, which is 1 year. But we do know that there are a heck of a lot of cases in that unit. There's a ton of volume, and it's short-staffed. And what we also know is that it's going to take a long time to build up a staff. So what's the only other thing you can look at? You got to figure out a way to handle and manage the volume. Well, we have a new police commissioner. It's not an original idea, but he certainly is an advocate of this idea because he used it in New Orleans. And his view is, look, why don't we take the minor cases out of internal affairs, let the district commanders deal with those issues. When I say minor cases, I'm talking about things like an officer not shining his shoes, or an officer not showing up for court, or maybe not making a medical appointment. We're not talking about interaction with the community. We're certainly not talking about serious offenses. But even these minor cases, they clog up the system. They make up so many of these thousands of cases that have to go to internal affairs, and what it results in is that the most serious cases can't be addressed. And so this commissioner has pretty much demanded that a policy be created that would allow him to permit his district commanders to resolve these minor cases, and they'll be defined in a policy. And he wanted it done yesterday. Well, you know, he has justification for it, and we understand it, but unfortunately, from the monitoring team's perspective, we can't do that, and I'll tell you why. Because we have a process with policies, and that is we want to have community input on any policy. We don't care how big it is or how serious it is. And even in a situation like this, where we understand how important it is, how critical it is to get this logjam fixed, you don't want to get away from one of the most important things that we have been able to benefit from over the last year and a half. Our policies are as good as they are because, yeah, it took time. We gave the community basically, in some cases, 60 days. It's 30 days here and 30 days in a second tranche to review and to provide comments. But those policies are so good because the community, we got a lot of community input, and that community input is embedded in those policies. And so from our perspective, even though he is right, we need to get this process unclogged. You know, what are we going to miss? There may be some great ideas that folks in the community can point to so that when there is a permanent policy in place, it can be the best policy out there, not something we've got to go back and tape, 6 months later. So what we have decided to do, or I should say the parties have decided to do, it's a compromise, and the monitoring team is behind it. They've decided to, okay, we know we have to put a policy in place, and it's going to take, a minimum 60 days because we have to have public comment. And the policy actually was put on the website yesterday, so the community has until, I think, August the 15th to comment. And then, of course, we expect that policy, once it goes through its jumping through its hoops, The policy should be effective September 15th. But that's 2 months from now. And while we know that you're not going to fix the system immediately, you know, the sooner you get started, the sooner you're going to have a good result. So the compromise is this. We'll put the policy out, but in the meantime, we will do, or the department will do a pilot. And what that pilot consists of, they're going to pick 3 of the 13 areas that are considered minor, and they will be officers who fail to appear for court, officers who lose the equipment but not handguns, and I think the third is officers who miss their medical appointments. And these 3 things involve more cases than you think. The idea is to get that process in place right now. And so we expect, we have to train the commanders in order to see, just can't jump it out and say, hey guys, do it tomorrow. But we think in the next week or 2, the pilot program can be up and running so that we are at least beginning to address the volume issue. And there are 2 things that come out of that. First, I mean, you are addressing a little bit the volume. I'm not going to overstate it because you just don't know. But the second thing that we look at, by doing a pilot program, you get a chance to figure out whether the systems you have in place make sense. I mean, you have to audit this stuff. You got to figure out, are the commanders, even on these minor offenses, are they employing appropriate discipline? Are they either too harsh or too lenient? Are they not classifying things correctly? So this gives the department a chance over the next 2 months to figure out whether the policies they put in place are well done. Do they need some changing? Do they need some modifications? Do you need to add more items to the list of minor offenses? Do you need to take some away? And so that's going to be a big advantage. And we think by having this pilot program, it will benefit the system all across the board. And ultimately, the idea is to get this system in a place where until you get staffing up in place, the volume will be reduced enough so that the investigators who are assigned to do investigations can spend their time working on the serious misconduct cases so that those police officers who should not be on the force can be addressed. So I mentioned real quickly about Commissioner Harrison, and I think this is a good point for me to turn this over to Chuck Ramsey, who can talk about leadership, supervision, and staffing.
Thanks. Well, good evening. As Ken mentioned, my name is Chuck Ramsey. I'm one of the deputy monitors since actually the beginning, since we first began work on this implementation of the consent decree. I know Mike Harrison. I know him very well. Prior to, actually I retired 3 years ago. Prior to that, I was the police commissioner in Philadelphia, and I got to know Mike very well. This city is very, very fortunate to have someone of this caliber. New Orleans, Louisiana has more than its share of challenges. They were also under a consent decree, and so he's got a tremendous amount of experience in dealing with the implementation of a consent decree, at the same time dealing with the day-to-day crime issues that you have to be able to deal with. It's not an either-or proposition. You have to be able to do both. And this is a city where you just can't afford not to continue to address crime problems at the same time you're implementing. So I think we'd be very pleased with Commissioner Harrison. He has reached out and done a national search looking to bring in people from the outside to assist him. He's had some success. He brought in an individual from Louisville, Kentucky, Mike Sullivan, head operations, but he's not yet been able to find an individual to head internal affairs. He had a couple people that we thought would be very good candidates, but there were issues that came up at the last minute. It's not easy to just pick up and move to another city, family considerations and everything else. So that was not, it didn't happen, but it will. He's reached out to some of the major organizations that really have the ability to put out information regarding Baltimore. This is really, I think, it's an opportune time for anyone who is looking to really take on a challenge to come here and really be a part of something that I think is going to be very, very special, and that is, re-engineering policing here in in the city of Baltimore. And I'm very confident that's gonna happen, and I believe the consent decree is gonna help that take place. Staffing is truly an issue here in Baltimore, particularly in the patrol division, which is where your uniformed police are. We did have the Police Foundation come in and take a look at staffing early on when we first began this process. Now we have an individual, Dr. Weiss, who is working with us and drilling down a lot deeper. There's a couple issues that you have to address when you start talking about staffing. One is just the sheer number of people that you have. Is it an adequate number of people that you have available to perform all the functions that this department needs to be able to provide? The second part, though, is how you're using the people you already have. Do you have them deployed properly? In other words, are you over-specialized? Do you have too many people in this unit, not enough in that unit? Do you need to shift some people around? Supervision is certainly an issue that span of control. How many supervisors do you have? What's the quality of the supervisors? What kind of training the supervisors get in order to be effective in doing their jobs? There's a tremendous amount of training that is taking place, and Seth is going to talk a little bit about training, but just as it relates to supervisors, supervisors are part of that training effort. Ken mentioned earlier about this pilot that the commissioner wants to run, taking some of the less serious complaints or transgressions. These are mostly internal. They're not citizen complaints. Being late for roll call is internal, not showing up. These are the kind of things we're talking about. But then you have to train supervisors that will be handling those investigations so they can do a proper investigation. You just don't hand them a file and say do the investigation and assume that they know how to do it, because they're not internal affairs. So that's going to be a training component. So it's good that it has been delayed slightly, because if you just throw it out there, the quality of investigations you get. I can also say that that is not unique to Baltimore. And if there's anything, Baltimore is unique in that they don't have a method of having some investigations of minor transgressions that are not based in citizen complaints handled by the the command, by the officers' command. It's highly, in fact, I was surprised when I heard that Baltimore didn't do that. So there is no surprise that they've got some cases that really go beyond the statute of limitations because they simply are overwhelmed, even though they should be setting priorities and taking the serious ones first. But certainly they're overwhelmed with the kind of work. So that's where we're at right now. Staffing is a work in progress. It takes time to hire new people. I'm hoping we get something concrete by the fall. I believe October is when we're looking to get something, the staffing plan presented, that we can begin implementing that as a result. And we'll certainly keep you posted as that moves along. But again, if something has to be done, like as soon as possible, because you can't, at the same time you're hiring new people, you have attrition on the other end. So you've got people retiring, and at the same time you're trying to bring new people on board. So you've got to bring more people on board than are leaving in order to be successful. And that's one reason why it takes so long. And then with that, you've also got to look at promotions, because then you're spanning control with supervisors, and then you have to backfill. So I don't want to get too much in the weeds with that, but staffing is not a simple thing to resolve. But it's essential that they do it, because they cannot continue at the rate that they are right now in the city. They're simply burning people out, and they're not able to do everything they need to be able to do. So, Ken, if there's anything
So we're gonna pause. We got a lot of information and a quick burst from the experts. So Ken covered the training and curriculum issues, and he talked about, Chief Ramsey talked about the staffing issues, and as well as the policies and the public comment period. So we just want to pause right now to see if anybody had any questions about what we've actually covered at the forum so far, just to make sure everyone is grasping what's being said up here. You guys are pretty involved and regular, but if anyone has any questions about
Don't be shy.
Right, any of those topics.
I have one that's a kind of process question, because I just became aware of the website, the police department website, that lists all the draft policies that are under consideration. This is just a really minor point. I had trouble finding the ones that are officially under public comment. That's the first thing. It would be great if like the first three were the ones that, there's one ending on July 22nd, one ending on July 24th, on, technology, the other one is in the end on sexual harassment. But I couldn't find them. I'm probably still missing. There was a long list. That you can find very easily. So it'd be great to know what's under public comment, draft, or even though they're all on some level draft. And then the second is a little more open-ended question for you, because I know how important community input is for you. Whether or not that website for getting online comments, for me it's just that I want to actually see the policies to see if I have something that's they can do, but if the online comments are being used, and whether you guys are looking at what people are saying online, or is it really important that we have something to say about technology that would show up here or in the community?
Both. And Jessica is out as one of our experts on this technology. If I gave you an answer, you would shoot me. So that's a good point. And we should be able to tweak that. Don't you think, Jessica, to make it?
Well, it's not on our web, so she's talking about the.
I know it's a BPF, but I mean the suggestions we can make to them.
Yeah,
I agree with you. I think
that's
if
right.
we
But
can make it easy, we should do it.
that's right, and because the page that you're talking about, there is another page another page on BPD's website which identifies which policies are in a public comment period, and so there is a way to do it. I don't exactly know what the URL is for that page, but there is. If you navigate around the website, you can find policies that are in public comment
But
period.
they also are on our page and it can feed you out to it. So you can look on our page and our Facebook and it'll feed to it as well.
Yeah, so, and our page as well, it's actually probably more prominently displayed on our page. As Jessica said, we'll tell you what policies are out for public comment, and then we link to those policies on the BPD page so that you can read them. And in terms of making comments on the policies, because this was your second question, so at the end of the public comment period, the police department takes all the comments submitted to it. We take all the public comments submitted to us, and the Justice Department takes all the public comments submitted to them. And then the team from BPD, Justice Department, and the monitoring team that's working on that set of policies gets together and looks at the public comments, addresses them, and then tries to incorporate them into the next draft of the policies. Then, when that happens, it actually goes out for a second public comment period to show, which public comments have been incorporated and to see essentially if we've gotten it right. It's really not a total do-over, though, there's always an opportunity to comment on BPD's policies, but it's an opportunity to say, okay, if I've made a comment on the draft policy, the first draft, have you really taken that into account in this updated draft? And so there's an initial comment period, a shorter second comment period, and then the policy gets finalized. But I should say this, as you noted, like even the policies, once they're finalized, they remain in draft form until officers are actually trained on them, right? Because they can't go into effect until officers have been trained on them. And so, for instance, and I won't get into training too much right now, but you've got training going on use of force policies now. Well, last year, about 15 different policies implicating use of force were finalized. Those policies are not effective yet because officers are just being trained on them now. When the training is over in a couple of months, then they become effective, and then officers will be held accountable to them.
But just to mention one thing, they're operating under the old policy, so it's not as if there's no policy. They operate under the old policy until the training's come. Then the new policy would kick in. I think it's also important to note that not only do we as the monitoring team review those comments, the Department of Justice reviews them as well, that team. And so then we will react to that. So both DOJ and the monitoring team reviewing comments, drafts, revised drafts, all those kinds of things.
So Seth, this is a good time to transition into training.
Unless there are other questions.
Anyone have any other questions
Internal
about that?
affairs,
first part?
staffing, or supervision?
Good, go ahead.
Staffing.
And it's just a kind of a reaction to something I saw. There was an article in the paper that highlighted a graduating class from the police academy. And as I recall, it was about 20 officers. And I wondered when I saw that, how are they going to make getting the vacancies filled at that rate? It just seems like something has to change in terms of who they're accessing, who they're pulling in, how they're attracting people, and so forth.
You're absolutely right. Recruiting has been tough, not just for Baltimore, but policing in general. When we go outside of Baltimore, policing's taken a lot of hits over the last few years, and so many departments are kind of struggling to try, but you gotta be able to increase those classes. So that's part of what the commissioner is doing, is finding ways to market better, to reach people, to really convince them that, becoming a police officer is something they really need to seriously consider. Reaching out to that population of people who probably would not have necessarily considered policing as a career, but, if you reach out to them, they would be willing to take on the challenge. So that's all part of it. But small classes barely keep up with attrition, and that's part of the problem. If you hire 28, but you've lost 20 through attrition, you've only gained 8, and it takes forever to build that up. And so you're right. I mean, you're absolutely right, and they're doing everything they can to be aggressive in terms of recruitment.
Has anybody seen the recruitment and
I was
it
ready
just
to
went
get
out?
back on that.
I think it's something along be a part of the greatest comeback ever.
Right.
This is all part of marketing, and whether it works or not, we'll see. But to Chuck's point, I think the department has brought in experts to do market studies to figure out what's the best way to reach the population that the department needs to reach, because you just don't want any old body on the police force, which means you don't want to waste your time with any old body applying. You want to be able to do an application and a process where you get people who have a reasonable chance of success, and that those are the kind of folks you want if you really want a police department that obeys and follows the Constitution. So I think they're doing everything that they can, but it's tough. It's a tough economy. The economy is good right now, and people are making other selections, and there are other factors that play into it. But I think they're doing all they can to accept.
And diversity is important. So the marketing is targeting specific demographic groups. I mean, you want to be diverse, in terms of race, gender, sexual orientation. I mean, you name it. You need to have as much diversity as you can possibly have, but the strategy is different for each group. And so that's why it's important that they have brought in people that have a lot of experience in these areas to help them along. I saw the video, Commissioner Harrison just did a video for recruitment. It was so good, I recommended that he show it to all the members of the police department that are currently there, because it reminds people, I think, about policing and what it should be all about, and the values that, people should hold very, very dear. It was excellent. And is it on the website?
Yes.
It's on the website.
If you get a chance to see it, just take a look at it. I was very impressed with it.
Let me add this, and Chuck said he didn't want to get into weeds before, but I think your question actually calls for getting into weeds a little bit, because it's important to note that stepping up its recruitment effort is not the only thing the department is doing to solve its staffing issues. There are 2 other things that Commissioner Harrison is actively considering. They were featured in the staffing study that was produced at the end of last year, and will undoubtedly be part of the staffing plan that gets produced later this year. One is civilianizing certain functions that are now being performed by sworn officers, and redeploying those sworn officers to patrol or to internal affairs, places that have shortages. Because there are, and it remains to be seen how much, but there are a number of functions within the department, whether it's data entry, but basically desk duty type functions, that sworn officers don't need to be doing, right? Or security details, things like that, and they need to be redeployed to the street, and they can have civilians filling those functions. That's one thing. The other thing is, there's been a proliferation of specialized units within the police department in the last couple of decades. There is widespread recognition within the department, including among the rank and file, that not all those specialized units need to be there. And so the idea is that the commissioner and his folks are gonna take a close look at all those specialized units and winnow them down only to what's really essential, and then redeploy officers who are now in those specialized units to patrol to fill some of the gaps.
Any other questions?
We have one more question, right here in the back.
I did. Some of it was answered because I was going to ask what's happening in general. But I am curious when you, again, I know you don't want to get too much in the weeds, but I'd be very curious about this notion that the DPD is dramatically understaffed. Is there any sort of rough numbers you can put on this as far as how much bigger it should be than currently?
You mean in terms of the overall strength, the overall sworn civilian strength? I mean, that's one thing I hope we get when we get this, the plan. We know that there are some shortages. The question is, how much? As Seth mentioned, it's not just on the sworn side, because, you got sworn doing those particular, functions that could be picked up by a civilian. It doesn't mean the job goes away. So now we gotta look at hiring civilian staff to be able to backfill those jobs if you want to be deployed. We don't have an exact number now,
Yeah, no, I didn't.
but once we do, obviously that's public.
And one of the things we have to also consider is technology, which right now we're basically still in, I hate to say it, at ground zero. But what effect will that have 2 or 3 years down the road in terms of efficiencies? So I think this staffing plan is going to be I don't want to use the word moving target, I prefer to say it's going to be an evolving project, because I think a lot of it is going to depend on technology.
Did you have a question?
Yeah, back to, Department of Health, way more descriptive, I really like that. Is this department presently understaffed, and how is morale among the officers who serve in this department?
It is understaffed, and I think from what we've heard, and Seth actually attended a focus group, it's not good. A lot of it is because of the staffing issue. They feel that there are not enough police on the force. They feel that they've been drafted to do, in other words, they have to work overtime. This is a funny thing, but they love the overtime because of the money. But if you are a young officer and you plan to have a picnic with your family, and you get an order, that morning that you've got to work, 10 extra hours, it doesn't make for a good work situation. Now, some of that has been addressed, but there's a shortage, and when there's a need, you have an event like the Inner Harbor, or you have a horrific murder someplace where you need to cover an area. The first duty of the commissioner is to make sure he's got people out there doing the work, and so he has to pull them from someplace. And so when you're understaffed, you're going to have an issue with bringing in more people and making them work a lot longer than they should, and that's not good, because a tired police officer is not someone you or I want to see on the street.
And Ken was speaking to morale within the department, across the department, and you may have been speaking about what's the morale like in the Public Integrity Bureau, the Internal Affairs Unit. Am I getting that right? And I think it's the same. Here are folks, they're understaffed, they feel overworked, they feel underappreciated, they feel like Ken alluded to this earlier, they feel like they're spending a lot of their time, too much time handling minor complaints, and not enough time investigating more serious complaints. I feel like they think that they do not have adequate training to handle internal affairs investigations specifically, which are a different kind of investigation, a specialized type of investigation that requires specialized skills. And the department is working on providing them that kind of training, but they're not there yet. And so I think that that is a broken function within the department, and has been for a long time. And it's in the process of getting fixed, but it's not fixed yet. And I will say this, it has a spillover effect on morale within the police department, because here's the deal, and we actually conducted we're conducting several different types of surveys under consent decree. We're conducting actually right now we have folks at Central Booking conducting a survey of custodial arrestees. We've done a community survey with the Institute for Urban Research at Morgan State, and we've also done officer focus groups. In the officer focus groups, which were conducted last month, one of the constant complaints that you heard is that, you know, somebody might get a minor complaint for showing up late to roll call or for, you know, losing their OC spray off their duty belt or something like that, right? And it's something that should be handled by the commanding officer. Shouldn't really have to go to internal affairs. These are relatively minor complaints that don't involve civilian encounters. But because the folks in internal affairs are so overworked, it might take 9 months to a year to resolve a complaint that minor. But while that's happening, those folks are stuck. They can't be promoted. They can't move to another unit. They feel like the internal affairs process is totally gumming up the works for them. And it is contributing to the low morale within the department. That's one of the constant refrains that we heard during the focus groups, is that because internal affairs is broken, it's having a negative effect on us. Not because they're imposing too much discipline on us, but because they're not processing cases quickly enough.
So do we have any more questions on that before Seth gets into the training portion?
Feel free to ask questions at any time on any of these issues, so you're
Yeah,
not.
so when I listen to all this, it just seems to me that, you know, one of the critical points with our police department is its budget. And so, talking about the cost of added training, the cost of staffing, supplementing, you know, civilian staff with, you know, and replacing officers that are filling those positions, so that's even more money. In addition to technology issues, and so it's snowballing. And so the point of concern is, what is this budget going to look like? And are they working on curtailing some things and changing some, you know, minimizing their budgets in some other spaces to help kind of like balance this out in some way?
Well, you know, let me answer it this way. I think some of the beauty of the consent decree and perhaps some of the, I won't say negative, but some of the consequences of the consent decree, they're going to have to do this. Okay? Now, where do they find the money? You know, let's face it, Baltimore City is a poor city, but it's still the center of this state. You have surrounding jurisdictions that have lots of money, and they may think they're insulated from the problems in Baltimore City, but they're not. So sooner or later, you know, folks in Annapolis are going to have to recognize that, you know, if you don't want to have problems in your jurisdiction, you're going to have to help this city solve a serious problem. I mean, the money's got to be spent. You know, the technology has to be fixed. You have to have staffing because you've got incredible murder rates every year. I'm not suggesting that the police can solve that all by themselves, but it's an issue. But the money is going to have to be raised, and this is not a poor state. And so this is kind of off the consent decree because that's not really the lane we travel in. Our job is to make sure that they comply with the dictates of the decree. But the reality is that you're going to have state contributions to make this work.
Yeah, the city is going to have to provide resources. The city and the department have no choice but to come into compliance with the consent decree, and that's going to cost money. And so, you know, whatever the budget's going to look like is what it's going to look like, but they got to come into compliance. And so they're going to have to find the revenue somewhere. And I know there are always spending pressures and all this other sort of stuff. But I mean, just look at some of the police facilities. We didn't even talk about facilities. I mean, some of the facilities is just, I mean, absolutely terrible. And so we didn't even talk about that. So, you know, there's just a lot that has to be done, and it is going to cost. So the state and the city are going to have to figure out something.
Case in point, I was at the Trading Academy all day yesterday and today. It's in, you know, sort of an old, effectively abandoned schoolhouse in Northwest Baltimore.
They know Pimlico Junior High School.
Right, and you know, I'm not dressed like these guys are dressed today. Not that I would necessarily put on a tie to go to the training academy, but I'm in this shirt because it is so crazy hot in that building. You wonder how officers can withstand, you know, can go through, you know, training from 7 o'clock in the morning to 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you know, in a building that is barely air conditioned when it's 95 degrees outside with 95% humidity. You know, these are not facilities that are fitting to the professional culture that BPD needs to aspire to. And Judge Berdar has made that point repeatedly. And as many of you know, BPD is in active discussions right now at the University of Baltimore to move the training academy to facilities there, which would better accommodate BPD's training needs, and also, you know, be the attractive front door to the department really needs, you know. The last thing you want to do with a new class of recruits, and I saw them running around the hallways today, you know, is, you know, put them in a facility like that and say, hey, you know, you're becoming part of the policing profession now.
Nobody wants to work at Pimlico Junior High School.
You can't concentrate.
It's a tough situation.
On anything.
And it spillovers into everything, so you need to have a better face for the department.
Yes, ma'am.
What kind of role do you see, I was reading something about Union Baptist Church, Institute.
I mean, this entire process, that means the folks who started this process years ago, the folks that are working on it now, the idea is to build some relationship between this department and the community. Reverend Hathaway took the first step. I won't say that is the first step. I'm certain others have done others, but that's the first step that's gotten some recognition, where he's actually spent church money to build a substation so that police officers in the winter can come in and write their reports in someplace warm. Communities can come in and kind of, you know, meet with the police officers. Summertime, same deal, get something cold to drink, but you have community, because it's open to the community. It's not just for police, but they are welcome to use the premises. So it's designed to build relationships, and so this is a good step forward. I hope others will do it. Yes, ma'am.
We talk about substation, in public housing, we had one, and we changed that, we got 5 different managers. So those managers that came after the managers that we had, they put it in place, they took it and used it for maintenance. So we're trying to get back for the police officers, but we didn't have the right, many crimes we did. Now we had 4 killings in Douglas County since this year started. And, I've been writing with them, so the manager we got now, she promised that we would get this up.
Okay.
And I said, because that's the only way the police will know the community, and the community will know the police officers.
I think it's a good point.
And just before we go into Steph's piece, I just wanted to talk about Reverend Hathaway's, it's really a gathering space for both, and that came from early on in this process. We did a asset mapping exercise at Union Baptist with the CODIF, the task force did it there. And one thing we identified in that meeting was that most of our churches in Baltimore City had the asset of facility. So like Ken said, when he recognized that his space could be an asset to police and community relations, he took that first step. And like I said, there was a plan to get funding for it, and it fell through, but Reverend Al didn't stop. He actually appealed to the church and their board, look, this needs to happen, and hopefully that kind of sets the bar for other churches, where there's a precedent there that most of our inner city churches have that space. There's multiple conversations about safe space and sacred space all around the city, where that's like the first step in community policing, is the community doing what they can for policing on their own. So
You know, Ray, you raised a really good point, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because I want to give everybody a chance to ask questions, but Ray and I were at the ribbon cutting on Saturday when this I call it a substation. It's really not a substation. It's really a community meeting place that invites everybody, including police officers, to show up. And Seth and I think Ray met 2 of the patrolmen in that neighborhood. I forget their names, but that's their post. You know, they're there all the time. They are very engaging. It's a tough neighborhood, but they do a good job. Well, you know, they were there along with a cohort of friends, and not necessarily relatives, but friends and folks that they deal with, and it was amazing. And the police commissioner was there, and so that's obviously going to bring, he's like a magnet. He brings a lot of folks to come see him. But having said all that, the interaction between the police that were there and I'm talking about the real neighborhood people. I'm not talking about people who are just there, you know, for one reason or another. These are folks who live there. They're in there. They're mingling. They're engaging. And you know, that's really what you need if you're going to begin to develop a relationship between the department and the public. I mean, we're a long way from being where we need to be, but you got to start from someplace. And I think, to answer your question, that the Union Baptist was a good first step. We need a heck of a lot more of that, and not just churches. You know, there are neighborhood associations that do the same thing. So anyway.
Do you recommend that police officers live in the city? You know, to
That's not really something that I will comment on because it's my role as the consent decree lead monitor. I mean, I have to stick to the mandates of the consent decree. I'm really not going to give you my personal view, and it's not part of the consent decree.
So
I will say this though, that BPD as part of its staffing plan is prioritizing hiring people within the city, and that's part of its recruitment effort now. And it's actually set goals, and I don't have those goals at my fingertips now, but it's actually setting goals for hiring a certain percentage of its new officers from the city. I think it's, well, I'm not gonna venture a guess as to the number because I'm not sure. Yeah.
right. And I will say that before I was part of the monitoring team, I was actually part of that whole recruitment process where they spoke earlier about this new recruiting video and website to bring in new officers. So Seth talked about the goals. When we first started that, there was a mission to help to create a police department reflective of the communities they serve. So this whole new recruiting venture is geared towards making the police department more reflective of the city's populace. So it is geared towards indigenous people, minorities, women, all sorts of targeted individuals that make up Baltimore City. So, like we are on the monitoring team and we can't say either way, but really that is the goal of this whole recruiting venture, is to ensure that the new department as it's being developed is reflective of the population it serves.
And this isn't directly responsive to your question, ma'am, but one of the things that was encouraging to us is that last year, at the end of last year, beginning of this year, BPD started experimenting with the idea of having community members actually on the interview panels for new officers. And so you actually have folks from the community, not simply folks within the department, who are interviewing prospective officers. I don't know when that's going to be finalized, but I know the process was piloted over a couple of months at the end of last year, beginning of this year, and seemed to gain some traction.
Okay, so we're having a great conversation, but I want to pause again to make sure Seth can clue us in on the training.
It's having conversation with you and answering your questions is obviously more important than us making a presentation to you. But I will talk about training. Training really has been the primary focus of the last 6 months. As Ken said at the outset tonight, last year was about getting the policies in shape. There are still some policies that are in the process of getting in shape, but many of the core policies are now in shape. And the idea is to begin training officers on them. In addition to training officers, one of the places that was short-staffed was the academy. You had literally a handful of officers there, not only to train all the other, to train recruits, to train officers, and to draft new curriculum based on the new policies. You had only like 3 or 4 officers there. And so one of the things that we required as a monitoring team was that, look, if you want to make a go of, having a really tip-top training outfit, you need to assign 10 additional officers to the training academy now. Because if you don't, there is no way that you're going to be able to train all these officers on the new policies that are coming online. So one of the things that former acting Commissioner Tuggle did, and then followed up by Commissioner Harrison, was that they did assign 10 instructors to the academy. I've seen them in action for the last 2 months. A lot of them are new to teaching, but they're learning quickly, and I think they're getting very good. One of the things that's positive about assigning folks from other parts of the department is that they have credibility with the folks that they're training. So these are not people that were taken off desk duty and then brought over to the academy. These are people that were taken from patrol units, were taken from other specialized units, and who've been working the streets for the last decade or decade and a half, and who are now being asked and tasked with the responsibility of training their fellow officers. And so they gain instant credibility because they've not simply been on desk duty for the last decade, but they've been out in the street. So that's been a really good development. The way that the training is going to be rolling out over the course of the next year is, in conjunction with the Department of Justice and the monitoring team, BP decided it was going to focus its efforts on training in 3 core areas. And they're core areas both because they're central to policing and because they're the areas that the Justice Department found the most problems in during its investigation back in 2015, 2016. So we're talking about use of force, we're talking about stop, searches, and arrests, and we're talking about fair and impartial or non-discriminatory policing. So this first tranche that is going on now is focused on use of force with certain aspects of fair and impartial policing, specifically the effects of implicit bias on officer threat assessment. So that's part of the curriculum now. And it's a 2-day training, full days, and the idea is that, rather than training all officers in each of these areas, which would probably take upwards of a week and a half, and going from one group to the group, next group to the next group to the next group, and covering all these areas, use of force, stop, search, and arrest, fair and impartial, all in one block, and therefore taking basically a year to get everybody trained, and so you don't have these new policies coming online for a whole year. The idea is to take it subject by subject. So right now is use of force, and the idea is that over the span of 3 or 3.5 months this summer and into early fall, officers are going to be trained throughout the department on the new use of force policies in this aspect of fair and impartial policing that I mentioned. In the meantime, there are curriculum writers who are currently working on drafting curriculum for the next tranche, which is stop, searches, and arrests. And that curriculum will be put out for public comment once it's finalized in the next couple of months. Public will have an opportunity, and I should say the public had an opportunity to comment and did comment extensively on the use of force curriculum, and their comments made their way into that curriculum. Same thing will happen with stop, searches, and arrests. Once that curriculum is finalized, you'll have another 3 or 3.5 month period where officers across the department get trained on it. The training on stop, search, and arrest will take place between this fall and probably midwinter, say January. And then once officers are finished being trained on that, those policies, those set of approximately 15 policies governing stop, search, and arrest will be finalized, and officers will be held accountable on that. And then finally, there'll be another training that is focused squarely on fair and impartial policing near the beginning of next year, spilling into early spring. Again, 3.5 months, all the officers will be trained, and the new non-discriminatory policing policies will then become effective. I mentioned before that the public has the opportunity during the curriculum drafting process to weigh in on what the curriculum looks like. In addition, the police department itself has formed what it calls the Training Review Committee, the Police Training Review Committee. I may be butchering the name. The Community Training Review Committee, right. The CTRC. And after the curriculum is, so that committee, which is made up of one representative from each of the 9 police districts, as well as representatives from organizations across the city, including the Office of Public Defender, NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which is a national organization, but which has taken a real interest in reform here in Baltimore. Anyway, they will weigh in on the curriculum itself, but once the curriculum is done, they will attend pilot testing of the curriculum to see how it plays out in practice, and then they will add their input at that point as well, so that before the curriculum becomes finalized, the department has the benefit of the community's, or at least a segment of the community's views on what the curriculum looks like in practice. So that's what training is going to be looking like over the course of the next 9 months or so. At the same time, there will be more specialized training conducted within certain units, so curriculum developed and training conducted, for instance, for detectives who conduct sexual assault investigations. That training, that curriculum is in development right now, and sexual assault team investigators will be trained on it later this year. In addition, there will be training for all officers, but also training specifically for dispatchers and members of the crisis intervention team on dealing with encounters involving individuals with behavioral health disabilities and in crisis. So that training will be coming online too. Bottom line is there's a lot for the training academy to bite off this year, but the staffing is now largely there. They have the folks there who can do the job, and they'll be working closely with the Justice Department and with experts from our team on developing this stuff and rolling it out.
You may have already talked about this, but I may have missed it. But one of the important things that I love is the adult training techniques. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, and so one of the things that the department, and we insisted that the department do, is incorporate adult learning principles into instruction in the academy now. So historically, instruction in the academy has basically been one instructor sitting at the front of a classroom, like we're sitting in front of you now, with a PowerPoint presentation behind them and talking at a class. Not the most effective way to engage adults actively in the learning process. So there were several leaders from the academy who went out to Los Angeles and attended some training sessions with folks at the Los Angeles Police Department, whose training academy is considered state-of-the-art now, in part because they use these national best practices in adult learning. And what that means is that rather than having the class seated out there and the instructor seated up here, you have tables spread throughout the classroom, and you have instructors basically going around the classroom during the course of instruction, facilitating an active discussion about policies and principles, and using scenarios, videos, hypothetical written scenarios to prompt discussion. Not just lecturing out what the policies look like or what the tactically how to carry out policies in certain situations, but presenting officers with situations from real life events and having them actively discuss how they should respond consistent with policy and consistent with sound tactical practices. If you take a look at the survey responses that we're getting from officers, now it's been about 5 weeks that this use of force training has been live. By and large, folks are really, really happy with the way the training is. They feel like it's much more interactive. Look, there are still some officers from the old school who are not crazy about the new policies, and that is coming through too. But by and large, the vast majority of officers are happy with the new training, think it's a vast improvement over what they've had before.
And if I can just add one thing I think is very important when we approach training, we're making sure that it doesn't become just a check-the-box exercise, because they got a lot of training to put on. The quality of the training matters. And so in several instances, we actually pushed back timelines and gave more time just to make sure the quality was there. Otherwise, because you got a lot, yeah, we did it, but if it doesn't result in people understanding it or a change in behavior, then it hasn't really accomplished anything.
Yeah, I'd say one encouraging thing, I was in one of the classrooms I was in today. At the end, there was a debrief covering all the main takeaways from the day. And there was an officer from the SWAT team who was there. So one of the great things about this, which is different from training in the past, is you have officers from all units and all ranks doing the training at the same time. So you could have, somebody who, is essentially a lieutenant colonel in the operations division, in the criminal investigations division, there with, somebody who's been on the street for a year. So it's really good, particularly when, the members of the command staff chime in and talk about, how good the new training is and, how important these principles are to advancing policing within the city. But one of the things from a SWAT team officer who had really kind of developed credibility and earned the respect of the class over the course of the 2-day training, because SWAT team officers really know what they're doing when it comes to de-escalating potentially fraught situations and tactically how to approach those situations. He made the point when there was a little resistance from somebody in the room about how, they didn't really feel like the training on implicit bias was that useful. He said, look, bottom line is, as a department, this is great because we need more training. You know, we in the SWAT team get a lot of training on tactics. And, you know, it means that we're together as a group more. It means that we develop camaraderie more. And it means that we're used to working with each other more. I mean, just no different than, you know, the Orioles or the Ravens. I mean, no different than an athletic team that practices together. You know, police officers who work together every day have to practice together. And he was making the point, to a lot of nodding within the classroom, that there has not been enough emphasis on training within the department, and that, you know, he likes the fact that the department is moving in a new direction with some of the training, and emphasizing that it needs to do even more.
One of the things I'm going to add, just follow up with what Chuck Ramsey said earlier. You start at the top. You know, leadership makes a big, big difference in almost any business, and it's no different with the police department. In fact, I would say to you, because it is a paramilitary organization, it's probably even more important that you have a good leader. And Commissioner Harrison is a darn good leader who commands a tremendous amount of respect, and he is a true believer in constitutional policing. So when he says it up top, and he's not just doing lip service, he says it with passion, he means it. The folks working under him, whether they really want to do it or not, they're going to do it because I suspect at the end of the day they either get on the program or they get out.
So do we have any questions about the training?
Or anything else?
Yeah.
Toby?
I'm relatively new to this, in terms of following the consent decree. I think like you're a really passionate believer of paper, that we can get a constitutional police out of what we got because of the consent decree, and that's why I'm here. But I'm coming from a left of center position. And so I want you guys to step back from it and assure us that constitutional policing also means, in some ways, more limited policing. In other words, I think probably you're all invested, and I think the decree is in decriminalizing minor crimes, diverting alternative programs for use, et cetera. I know Harrison is, but sometimes it doesn't always sound like it when we're deep in the weeds of training and talking about how we have to get more police. And I think when you say that, we have to be convinced of the large, some of minds, we have to be convinced of the larger package about police in Baltimore in relationship to decriminalization, you know, and fewer jails.
I hear you, and to some extent, again, our role as monitors is to deal with the consent decree and stay within it. Now, having said that, I mean, there are clearly areas where the consent decree is, and I won't use the word decriminalizing because it doesn't really apply to what we do, but it is de-escalation. For example, when you deal with folks who have behavioral disorders, the mantra really is to divert those folks to the mental health situation. Now, you know, in the real world, I mean, in the conceptual world, it would be real nice that when folks had a relative who had a problem, that they would call the hospital. But you know, that's not the way it works in Baltimore and probably no place else. Guess who gets called for these kinds of things when Johnny is misbehaving and throwing things at his mother? She calls, or the father calls the police on Johnny or Sally, and the police have to show up. I mean, if they don't, they are not doing their job. Well, what the department is doing now is they're training special units to go in, have these crisis intervention teams, but the idea is to, where possible, you know, where you're not endangering the public or the officer, you try to do enough to get this person to an institution that can treat them. And I mean, that's just one of many things that's going on. I mean, a lot of the decriminalization that you're talking about has got to come through the legislature. You've got State's Attorney Mosby who wants to decriminalize marijuana. I mean, there's a debate, but these things have to come from someplace other than the consent decree.
Yeah, diversion is really the more appropriate term that we can use to kind of be able to deal with situations to find alternatives to just arrest, especially in dealing with young people with a mental health issue. I mean, there's a host of ways in which we could, you know, change the process to, you know, achieve the kind of results that we're talking about.
Yeah, could just, Nicole, if I could just one more thing about it. There are essentially 3 areas in the consent decree that talk about diversion or diminishing the role of the criminal justice system. One Ken talked about, which is interactions with people with behavioral disabilities and in crisis. The idea is to divert them away from the criminal justice system into the mental health system. And it's really a holistic approach under the consent decree. Ken attends monthly meetings of a group called the Collaboration Planning Implementation Committee, which is a mouthful. We call it CPIC. But that is a very, very broad coalition of police, community activists, folks who work in hospitals and mental health centers, people with lived experience with behavioral health disabilities, activists from that community, advocates like from NAMI of Baltimore and Disability Rights Maryland. It's a big group, and they are working on, I mean, one of the big things that's happening.
And judges, by the way.
Judges as well, judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers. One of the big things they're working on is a comprehensive study under the consent decree of the behavioral health system here in Baltimore to figure out, okay, we know we ultimately have the goal of diverting people with behavioral health disabilities from the criminal justice system, but do we actually have the resources to help them, right? And the idea is to find out where the gaps in those resources exist so that when those diversion policies are implemented, there's a place for these people to be diverted to, because there are gaps in that system right now, and the report will say what those gaps are. So that's one area. Second area is diversion of youth from the juvenile justice system. And there was actually a very large, very comprehensive, and very well-done report that was published under the consent decree by the police department at the very end of March, beginning of April, a youth diversion study. There are a lot of great recommendations in there that we know the police department is taking a close look at. And the third area is diverting people, not just youth, but adults as well, for what under the consent decree are called quality of life offenses, misdemeanor offenses like loitering and stuff like that. And the idea is for the officers, when it doesn't pose a real threat to public safety, to use their discretion to divert these folks from the criminal justice system and into alternative outcomes. And that part of the consent, the consent decree is still, compliance with consent decree is still coming online. Like Chuck was talking about the staffing plan before. Community policing plan is going to come out, or a draft of it is going to come out at the same time as the staffing plan. And part of the community policing plan is going to focus on diverting people, from the criminal justice system for these quality of life offenses. So those are the 3 principal areas.
It's actually 4 because behavioral
Just
disorders.
piggyback off of you, because what to your question is, the areas that the consent decree doesn't deal with is the organizations like us, the organizations like yours, right? You guys are located in the center of Pennsylvania, same thing in Winchester, and so that should be a hub for law enforcement to be able to say, you know what, I'm not going to lock you up. I'm going to send you to No Boundaries, and they're going to help you with blah, blah, blah. So being able to have organizations like yours and mine that police know about, that law enforcement know about, and they can divert young people there, send folks with mental health issues there. And so a lot of it also falls on us, those nonprofit organizations, as getting funding to do these violent prevention work, right? Many of us that's getting this funding, we do have to step up too and open up our doors and unlock our doors. And
We should need to be included in that youth diversion plan as well.
yeah.
Any other questions? Come on, y'all, don't be shy.
I have a question. I wanted to know if they had some kind of oldies or instructors that come in to recreations and camps like we have here. We have
first I'll say from a monitoring perspective, that reflective of the shortage. So really, there are officers that really do that on the outside of their time. So that's just a matter of connecting this center with someone that's willing to do that. And like we talked about earlier, they're trying to stabilize patrols, and it is short. But those officers are, Ken talked earlier about the officer that showed up at the center opening, where that's something that he does, Officer Chuck Lee.
Oh, okay.
And he actually comes out and talks about those things. And there's also a group, Neil Franklin's group, that kind of does that preparedness training, where they kind of come into different communities and areas and kind of emergency drill type training,
Yeah,
what
that's,
to
I
do
mean,
in,
we
what to do
had
in
it in
this.
school, so now we in a different generation, so I
Well,
don't see any of that going on in this building.
Well,
even
it's
though
not
we're
going
trying
on
to-
like it should.
Yes.
And I think that's going to be a matter of us connecting the dots, because like we said earlier, Nicole just hit it right on the head, is we as organizations got to kind of step up and we bridge those gaps,
Yeah,
where
'cause
we know.
this building is a free program.
Right.
We
And I'll make
everybody
sure-
volunteer their services to be in here, but still at that point, they don't know what to do with the kids, because we have like only 3 seniors and they like 67 years old. They sit, but when they get out of hand, kicking, flipping, doing all kinds of stuff, fights, everything.
So we're
But
going to
they
set
don't-
that up. I'm going to leave you I'm here every Thursday for real in our justice office. So I'll make sure that I set that up where we get an officer from Eastern District to at least drop in to see what's going on. And like I said, that's,
I'm keeping it real. This building is huge, and we have classrooms everywhere. So at that point, you know, I mean, it's no way in the world that you can hear what's going on, because everything is in the door. So at that point, and we have no, you know, we can't hear it, we don't know what's going on, so it's happening. So
I'll raise that issue, with the community policing plan, which is being put together.
And this is
And having the capacity to do something like that.
an organization by itself, adults and teens,
Yeah.
so at that point,
But I'll raise
you
that
know,
issue.
real service.
We're gonna work on that because
70 kids
Be-
and
Because Chuck Ramsey actually is heading up the community policing
Yeah.
part of it, so
Oh, okay.
we'll look at that.
The other thing you raised, which is a good point too, is also, you know, working with high-risk kids. You know, that's a different population than, you know, low risk that just want to come and just find a place to play ball, you know. We're dealing with kids that just, you know, have to have their own challenges
Right.
and how to handle situations like that as well.
Because I mean, I know there's 2 different situations, mental and then bad behavior.
Right.
I mean, just talking to the doctors, when I do that, that's what I do, my foster mom too. They separate the 2. So if you are bad behavior, that's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah, it is.
You're not mental, so we can't.
Right.
You
All
know,
bad
so
behavior
we
is
got
the result
kids
of
that are
mental
way
illness.
over the top, you know.
It's just bad behavior.
Okay, thank
I'll
you.
make sure I give you my card directly, but you'll see.
Any other questions? Come on, don't be shy. It's been a good group. I know you got 1 or 2 others.
That was good conversation with answers. I feel like everything I wrote on the parking lot, the team came up with an answer to, so you guys are doing great. But did we get anything through Facebook? Any Facebook questions? No one else has any questions?
Ray, it might be worth introducing Howard to everybody.
Oh, so come on up front, Howard Roberts.
Yeah, we're gonna clap for you.
Look. So this is Howard Roberts. He's the Eastern District Neighborhood Liaison, and I'll let Howard give you his spiel. No personal literature.
Hey, folks, first of all, if there's an issue, if it involves anything related to the police, we can help you. If I don't have the literature, I know how to get you to the literature. We had a wonderful conversation today, and I can tell you that these are the kind of questions that make the difference. These kind of turnouts is what makes the difference. And the kind of issues you all have raised are the kind of things that we hope we hope with this new effort to sort of encourage our police to do the things that we know policing should do, it can make a lot of the gaps that we've been highlighting today manageable. And again, I just think that it's clear without community involvement, I don't care what we can do with a police force, it won't make the kind of differences we all hope and pray will happen.
Thank you, Howard.
Thanks, Howard.
Thanks, Howard.
Okay, well, thank you.
Did we cover everything that we
Yeah,
have?
we covered everything.
We did.
So I think that was great. If no one else has any other questions, I think the team will be here for a few minutes if you want to kind of pull them to the side and answer.
You want to get personal
She didn't
opinions.
decide out when I said that. She was like, I want to see y'all on the side. But that's what we're here for, and we appreciate all your engagement. Do you have a question?
Do you have a date and a place for the October meeting yet?
That's Ray or,
Do we know? So I'm not going to make pretend I know which district.
I know which district it's in.
no, so the answer is no.
I don't know which district it's in.
But it's gotta be north or south, because this was east and April was west.
Right.
Right, and we,
You got a place you want us to go? I'm
Actually,
serious.
I have a concept.
Okay.
We had a bunch of questions about how to put comments on the website while comments are open for curriculum and things like that. You described some other things, resources on the website. It would be neat to have a venue where you could demonstrate this, even if you just started with the questions tonight and showed everybody how to navigate. Because the real headache in using a website is learning how to navigate it. And October is not next week, so you might be able to find a venue off the top of my
You
head.
get that right?
Did we find out the
No,
district?
no, well, you had it more specific.
Say it again.
Find a venue that has a resource to demonstrate navigating the websites.
Okay,
For
so
giving comments, for asking questions, for just the specific stuff we talked about tonight. You can describe a website,
right, and
but if you can see the website and see actual navigating on the website,
so bring in a projector and audiovisual capability.
or camp out at Morgan or Morgenthaler, a place that has a room with a full wall that allows you to project, because it's all baked in already.
Okay, and something else that's coming up, and I'll kind of, this is a preview, but as we move forward with these quarterly report forms, we will start collaborating more with the consent decree implementation unit, who actually manages those sites. So I think not only will we take your suggestion and make those capabilities, but we'll also have their experts here who know more about their website than we do to make sure that it's understood.
You know, potentially the police department.
Yeah,
potentially even better, I mean, you know, the consent decree implementation unit has, what, it has 2 meetings within two meetings within each district
Right.
during the course of the year, so 18 altogether. So I don't know why at their next meeting they couldn't do something like that to show folks how to navigate their website to get to the public feedback part of it.
We can give them that feedback.
this is part of one of the things Commissioner Harrison emphasizes the most. This is part of transparency. And having civilians sit on boards that are interviewing prospective police officers, that's transparency. And everybody wants it so much.
And I think having civilians watch the training is equally about more.
Yep.
And I'll say, I'm on that training committee for curriculums, and like Seth said, we kind of have to, after we give our feedback into what that curriculum looks like, we then sit in our mock training and see how, and really, I witnessed how community input changed that training in real time before any officer got to see it, where not only is that transparency, but there is an intentional effort to consider community input throughout this process.
You know, Ray, yesterday we got a really, really good suggestion at the town hall meeting, and someone suggested, look, you guys are using these scenarios, which is fine and dandy, but you're bringing scenarios in from outside of the Baltimore City. So we got enough going on in here. Why can't you pick actual real-time events? And it's a great suggestion, and I think, you know, over time it will be, but that, the point is that it's extremely important that we get community involvement and community engagement and community comments. And so, you know, it's important for folks like you guys to show up and participate in these pilot programs, because you get a chance to see what the cops are up with, what they have to deal with, and it also gives you a chance to see, you know, what needs to be done to help train them.
And most importantly, just to piggyback on what Ken said, is it's been demonstrated multiple times that we as members have influence on this process when we actually engage. I mean, almost every policy, when you get that second draft, there's some way it's reflective of the community feedback. So the goal for us is to make sure that the information is getting out there, the avenues are open, and you do have autonomous conduit to kind of express your community's views, your individual views, but we want as many people as possible to be engaged. So the end product is reflective of how diverse Baltimore City really is. So we thank y'all for coming out and filling up the parking lot and getting the parking lot answered today. That was great.
Thank you so much. Thank you.